we're going to have a legislative update, and I want to really thank our guests for taking time out of their busy schedule. I hope that they're finding some time to relax now that the session is over, but we're putting them to work this morning. The format will be that they'll make short presentations and then open it up to Q&A, so get your questions ready. Senator Koenig and Representative Baringer are our speakers today. Senator Koenig represents the 15th District, which includes a large portion of Central, Southwest, and West County, St. Louis. Senator Koenig received his Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration from Lindenwood. He is the Chairman of Ways and Means, Vice Chair for Health and Pensions, the Joint Committee on Public Employment Retirement, and the Interim Committee on Firefighting District. He belongs to a lot of other committees, but I'm not going to list all of those. You can look at that on the website. And he was in the Missouri House of Representatives from 2009 to 16. Representative Baringer represents the City of St. Louis, District 82, and she was elected to her first two-year term in November of 2016 and re-elected in 2018. Prior to her current office, she was an alderman of the city. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Business Management from Maryville University and a Master's in Corporate Communication from Lindenwood. She's the ranking minority member on Administration and Accounts, Fiscal Review, and the Special Committee on Government Accountability. And she too belongs to a lot of other committees, which you can see on the website. So I hope you join me in welcoming him today. I'm going to turn the program over to you, and you all can decide who wants to speak first. And
I think go first.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for having me here today. As far as rest, yeah, I don't get a lot of rest these days because I have multiple other jobs I'm doing. I do insurance adjusting. If you haven't noticed, there's been some storms in the St. Louis region. So yeah, I've been dumped on with a lot of work. I'm actually a little bit behind because I was in Nashville and went to Memphis. We've adopted 2 kids, and the 2 kids that we adopted have biological kids that were adopted in other families, and they're in Memphis. And so we were traveling to Memphis yesterday. We got back last night to visit some biological siblings that they have, and so that was definitely good. We try to do that once a year. This session, we passed 44 bills this session, which is actually like the lowest since I think 1992. Usually we pass roughly around 100. One reason for that was because of the Congressional Maps. There was a lot of infighting on the Congressional Maps. We did get a Congressional Map passed, which I was definitely working hard to do. I was initially going to stay out of it, but I ended up drawing like 80 maps. So I'm glad we got that done. We had one time we went over 40 hours on trying to pass a map, and we didn't end up doing it that night. And we almost had like 2 stints of that before we actually passed a bill out of the Senate. Education is extremely important to me. Last year we passed the ESA program, Educational Savings Accounts or Empowerment Scholarship Accounts. This really provides innovation in education, and I think this is critical. We have multiple schools where there's not a single child proficient in English and math here in the state of Missouri. And I know if I had a child that had to go to one of those schools, I would want another option for my children. So we passed that last year. I'm hopeful that right now the rules are getting promulgated for that, and it will really provide innovation because it allows the parent to use that educational expense for anything that they see fit. So it can be used for tutoring, tuition. You create micro schools. That's where you get innovation. You get a couple families together that hire a state certified teacher. So this year we actually improved that innovation with charter schools. Back when charter schools were first passed, it was locked in 2005 numbers as far as the local effort. And so over time there's been a disparity in the funding that charter schools get than with the traditional public schools. And so there's about a $2,500 disparity. We fixed that disparity this year in a bill, and so I'm very glad that we got that done. There was another big education bill we passed, which had a bunch of little stuff attached to it. I'm not going to go through all the components. It was Senate Bill 681. It has reading, so that way, I think one thing schools should do is make sure kids can read. If they can't do that, then they're failing, right? Kids need to read. It has competency-based learning, which I think is something we haven't seen in our schools, and so that's a very good bill. There was another bill, House Bill 2116, No Patient Left Alone Act. And so with COVID, patients, when they go to the hospital, have been not allowed to have anybody come with them. And especially with some patients, that's critical for their care because their loved ones need to speak for them when they're at the hospital. Another thing with COVID that's been really important is home-based businesses have just been exploding, or people working from home, even if it's not a home-based business. And so I passed House Bill 1662, and what that would do is say, all right, if you are working from home, if you have a home-based business, even if that home, it has to be the primary use is residential, like you're not changing the character of the home, but it makes it so that way a municipality can't come in and tell you can't do that home-based business. House Bill 2400 actually is a big omnibus bill. It has a lot, I actually attached several pieces to it. So back when Trump did his tax cuts, everybody familiar with the SALT deduction? All right. And so what happened is that was eliminated, and in New York and other states, I think as many as 22 states, allowed businesses to do those deductions in their business prior to paying their federal income tax. So we passed that, so that way it'll save businesses or taxpayers in Missouri $85 million in federal income tax, which will help incentivize people being in the state of Missouri. There was another component for small businesses that I attached to it, and it has to do with S-Corps. So if you're an S-Corp and you're doing business in another state, right now if you're doing it in the state of Illinois or in a state like that, you get to deduct any income tax that you pay in those states, so you don't pay Missouri income tax. But if you're doing business in a no income tax state like Tennessee or Texas, you still have to pay Missouri tax, and it creates a disincentive for those businesses to be in Missouri if you do a lot of business in a no income tax state. Very little fiscal impact from that component, but it does help a few small businesses in our state that are doing that, incentivize them to be in the state of Missouri. Some things that we did not get passed, and I can elaborate on any of these things if you want me to continue during questions, is CRT, Parents' Bill of Rights. That was something that was in the House. The House passed at least a Parental Bill of Rights and a CRT bill. We were close to getting it done in the Senate. I actually had an agreement with the other side that they weren't going to filibuster it. However, with the Congressional Maps, that kind of blew up the deal, at least on the Republican side. And so we were unable to, after we passed the Congressional Maps, the deal was we weren't going to pass any other bills, so we didn't have an opportunity to go back and pass the Parental Bill of Rights or the CRT bill. A bill that I had that I was hopeful the House would bring up was SJR 33. This would put an income tax cap in Missouri's Constitution and create more flexibility on the sales tax side. And that would, the cap would be at 5.9, which we are well below at this point in time, but it does protect us against a highly progressive income tax, and it also allows us to broaden out our sales tax base. We passed that through the Senate, actually 31-1, so it actually had wide bipartisan support. Another bill that we passed, we did pass an election integrity bill, House Bill 1878. This bill would actually give our laws in the state of Missouri some of the strongest election integrity laws in the country. It has photo ID. We banned what's known as Zuckerbucks. Anybody know what that is? All right, so what happened in the 2020 election is there's donations to election authorities. And the problem with that is they were unequal. So you might have some election authorities get a lot of outside money. It allowed them to drive out turnout in their county, and in other counties they might not. And so it creates an inequity between counties and their funding and their ability to actually run elections. So we do allow donations, but it has to be dispersed equally per voter. We banned Dropbox, so we didn't really have that issue in the state of Missouri. Air gaps, so we make sure that these election machines can't be connected to the internet was another thing that was put in there. We did, a provision that I added is party affiliation. So we still have open primaries. However, if you want to register with a party, register as a Republican or a Democrat, you will now be allowed to do so. I know when I knocked on doors, I heard this over and over again, oh, I'm a registered Democrat or I'm a registered Republican. It's like, not in Missouri. So you will now be able to do that. Also in that bill, the presidential primaries were elected, so we will be a caucus state. We've had caucuses in the past in the state of Missouri, and so that's what we'll be doing in the future. We'll save the state about $7 million because we won't have to run that election. As far as the budget, we spent $45 billion this year, which is by far the largest budget Missouri has ever had, by billions. I think the prior one was around 31 or 32, and so there's a lot of money floating around out there. We did save money on the top. We spent an extra $500 million on pensions to help fund them above and beyond our normal payments. We do have a lot of our pension systems that are underfunded, and that's especially going to be true now with what's happening with the stock market over the last several months and inflation. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Senator.
Hopefully I didn't cover material you wanted to cover.
Well, no, it's actually the opposite. What he covered, I covered as well, but I have a completely different perspective on it. I'll start with, if you are unfamiliar with me, that's okay. I'm doing my job well then. And that's because I am a fiscal hawk. That is my actual nickname. And I am the ranking member on fiscal review. And the reason that's going to be key is because fiscal review in the House is the last step for any piece of legislation, including the Senate, where we can actually kill it. It's dead on arrival if we want it to be. And that's why I'm starting out, because I need you all to understand the process. I can say we did this, we did that. I'm not going to. I'm going to say what happened to these different pieces of legislation, because you all need to know the game that's played in Jeff City. And so I consider this session extremely dysfunctional, because the House sent a map over to the Senate January 19th, and we didn't get it back till the last week's session. So that means that that's what was happening over in the Senate. And we were waiting and waiting for things to move, and they didn't. I sit on elections, and for the first time ever in elections, on that same note of a map, is that when it finally did come through, and of course, if you know the process, I apologize. If you don't know the process, I apologize, because it is long, it is tedious, and it is scary. And I appreciate it, because people like me who are on it know how to find not what's there, but what's not there. What are they not telling you? And so when I was sitting in elections, for the first time ever, we had someone who testified who had insisted it should be a 7-1 map, and that's why it was being held up. But the other words that came out were what was very unsettling to me. And the words came out with, well, we haven't seen what you all are looking at today, so we'll have to take a look at it and we'll let you know who we're going to go after in this next election. I was like, wow, that was an actual threat said in committee. So that's why I consider that dysfunctional. At no time do I think anyone has the right to come in and publicly, I mean, we get called all kinds of names in our offices and in the hallway, but never had seen anyone feel so empowered that they could do it on the record. That is what bothered me, and I called it out. But that was part of that dysfunction. On the House floor, on the House side, so the dysfunction was coming from the map on the Senate side. The dysfunction on the House side was coming from the fight within leadership. And just, I'm in the uber minority party, so this was not my party, but it was my show to watch. And so the reason I say it like that is because there should have been bills that were moving, going to committee, being heard, but instead of doing that, it was about how do I make sure that I can tell them at any time I'll stop their legislation so I can tell them how I want other legislation to go. And that was done, I believe, through fiscal review, and that's because fiscal review had members added to it that were extremely conservative, which is fine, that works well for me, and then not. And then there's only 2 Democrats that sit on fiscal review. Nothing can move out of that committee without us because of that faction. They were split, and I mean split big time, and killed. Can you imagine you have the state of Missouri is completely a red state. All power lies within one party, and they were killing bills in fiscal review that were their party's bills. And that's because of that split in that faction. The other thing about fiscal review is, and that's why I need you all to understand, in fiscal review, anything that comes, it doesn't even have to have a fiscal note at the end of session. Any Senate bill has to come through. But it's also where it comes before and after conference committee. And conference committee, if you're not aware what those are, and that's another very powerful, is that is where the speaker and the Senate pro tem will pick 3 people, and it has to be from each party, and they get to negotiate. They get to negotiate. Well, here's what we're gonna take out of that bill, and here's what we're gonna put in, and you sign it, well, no, if you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And then that bill comes to fiscal review again. And there is a report, and I stood up on the House floor, and I explained how to do this, and we have sitting seniors on the floor of the House that had no idea that we have what's called a conference committee summary. And in that summary, in the one line, shows you where that bill has ever been heard or ever been voted on. And the first thing I go to when it comes to fiscal review is that line. You know what I look for? The blank. We have amendments that are slid in to bills during conference committee, during amendment committee, during amendment on the floor, during amendment in the Senate, and no one's vetted it. That is a red flag. It should be red flagged to anybody. I don't care where you sit on the spectrum. A red flag is if somebody's hiding that, if they're sneaking it in at the end of session, if it's never been read, they don't want you to know it's in there, right? Well, I always have them. So that's why I love fiscal review, and people think I'm nuts. So because of that. There were some things, and I'll tell you, we talked about House Bill 1878, which was the omnibus elections bill. There were, the one thing that's in there is that, and I brought it up in committee, and I brought it up on the floor, is number one, makes you the party affiliation. It makes you. So if you refuse to tell me if you're a Democrat or Republican when you sign up to, register to vote, you can do unaffiliated. That is actually in that bill. I read every line, every word in every bill. And the problem I have with that is now you're going to know, because people will say, oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. And then people like my son will be so upset. They'll be like, no, this is unconstitutional. That you should know. Because as my father told me when I was growing up, there's a reason there's a curtain when I go to vote. It is none of your business if I'm a Democrat or Republican. It is my business who I vote for. So that is in there. It's not opt-in, it's opt-out. You have to say, I will not let you say Democrat or Republican. And then what will happen is, because I would do it, if I were a consultant, that's called data mining. So they're going to be able to get a hold of that information and say, here's all the registered Democrats, here's all the registered Republicans, we got it made, here we go, here's our list. So that upset me about 1878. The other thing about 1878 is it makes it a felony for me to give out an absentee ballot application, not a ballot, application. I have been in politics since 2002. I will get, Lindenwood Live is a great concert, and it's in my neighborhood, and I have a booth. And at my booth, I would have the absentee ballot application, 200 applications. What that bill says, that if I do that, I can be charged with a felony, because that's illegal. I can no longer offer in any way, shape, or form an absentee ballot application. Once again, application. So that's what upset me, because that's not done. Maybe it is done, because we'll get on to elections. Maybe it is done, but for me, that's never what it's been about. It's been about somebody coming up to my booth and saying, and me reminding them, the election's in August. Oh my God, I'm taking my kids back to college, I can't be there. Okay, here's your absentee ballot application. Get this mailed in, fill it out. Can't do that anymore. I can't go to block parties and say, does anyone need an absentee ballot application? We have an election coming up. That's illegal. I can be arrested. So that's what's upsetting to me on 1878. Which, if I were going to tell you, the other thing that upsets me, and I said I was on elections, is that we have convinced everyone that we had corrupt elections in the state of Missouri. We had so many people testify that they insist our elections were corrupt. I spoke earlier, before y'all got here because I didn't get my coffee, that the one thing that will never get past moi is that I live and die by the data sets on voting in the city of St. Louis. So I can tell you how, who voted, when they came out, how many absentee, I do that, that's all I do. I love to look at the numbers to see. That's how I predicted where the loss of population would be in the city and where the gain was based on turnout. So I just don't understand why we've convinced everyone we're just corrupt. And I totally disagree with that. Our county clerks, our Board of Elections have done a phenomenal job. And I promise you, if I saw anything wrong in the city of St. Louis, I would be the first one going, okay, we gotta fix this. So real quickly, I apologize. The best ever for me for this session, I wanna make sure you all knew, was the fact that I played an integral role for the first time. I actually mattered. And it's nice to know that you actually matter. Because you get told all the time, sorry, by the Senate, you're just the House, we don't need you. And you get told all the time in the House, you're just a Democrat, we really don't need you. They needed me. And they needed me because they did kill, on their own, bills in committee in fiscal review. And the other thing about that is, while we're sitting in that committee, because it goes so fast, I will have a omnibus bill that has a 63-page fiscal note that I was just given 10 minutes to look at, okay? So I told you, I go immediately to the summary, I find where it's blank, and I will immediately start texting that to whoever I think are the experts in that area and say, where's the problem here? And so that's what was good for me. But 1606, the best part was House Bill 1606 that got through, which wasn't gonna get through, just so you know. It failed in fiscal review, it got into an argument in conference committee because people were putting amendments on it, Senate amendments on it, that were gonna kill it. So we had to go, and I had to do what I needed to do to get it off. And the reason that was important is that bill is the St. Louis vacancy bill. And I fought, Representative Donna carried it, but I worked with him because when it comes to strategy and getting things done, you can't rely on someone telling you, well, it's gonna do this committee does this. No. They're gonna play games with you. So what we can now do in the city of St. Louis is we will be able to go into North City where you see these houses, the trees are growing out of them, where the police officer died. Those are vacant, privately owned properties. And that is because we are dysfunctional in the way that the city of St. Louis has what's called county seats within the city of St. Louis. The collector of revenue, the sheriff, the treasurer, those are all county seats within the city of St. Louis. They're all under state statute. So in order for them to streamline and move the process forward, since it was written, right? And I'll give you an example. The sheriff is a county seat within the city of St. Louis. It says in the state statute that the sheriff actually has to deliver in person the notice, okay, the eviction notice. Most of these properties, they do not live in Missouri. The property I was working on when I was in Oldham, they were in Florida. We cannot send our sheriffs to Florida. That's being streamlined, right? The notice can be done via mail. So that passed, and to me that was huge because you're not going to get people to go and invest in areas where on a block they could take down 60 of the 70 houses, but they got 10 houses that could sit vacant, privately owned, and these are not houses where people live. These are vacant, abandoned properties where children are grabbed, waiting for the bus, and are molested. It happens all the time, and that's what upsets me. People understand, it is not some nice subdivision. We got the one house and we'll cut the grass. These are buildings that the fire department you've seen are now putting X's on. They're privately owned, and that's what people don't understand. 1662. Senator was so proud of 1662, which I fought tooth and nail. And the reason I fought it tooth and nail is because I would love to say I live rural or suburban, but I don't. I live urban. And I've explained to people, you see this walkway? That is the most room we have in between our houses in the 82nd district. We do not have an acre. We do not have a farm. What we are houses that are within arm's length. And so if my neighbor runs a business out of their house, they are interrupting my quality of life. And when this was on the Senate floor of this bill, they said MML, Missouri Municipal League, so I apologize, had agreed to it. No, they had not. And when they were on the House floor and I challenged them and they said it was the language, they said it was the cleaned up language, and it was not. I have it on, I have the talk because I'll be using it when I show it to the people who say, how did you pass a bill that allows anyone at any time to have any business in their house? And when I said, well, it can't be a dangerous business. Okay, all right, my next door neighbor cuts grass. We live in the city, we don't have driveways. So they're gonna keep all the fertilizer chemicals, or all those chemicals in their garage. Well, they can't do that. Well, how are you gonna know? Well, because they shouldn't. I mean, that could be dangerous. Well, yeah, it could be dangerous, but since we have no idea they're running a business out of their house, I, as the homeowner, am gonna have to hire a lawyer and pay a lawyer to sue my neighbor. And there's a horrible show called Love Thy Neighbor on the ID network. And if you would like to see what neighbors do to neighbors when they get into a fight, it doesn't end pretty. So what we're doing is, as a former local elected official, I know what it's like to have neighbors who are horrible to each other, slash tires, throw things in their yard. You want to have the ability to say, I bought a house in a residential area, you should not be allowed to let hundreds of people come in and out, because that bill said, no oversight on hours, no oversight except for it can't be lewd, like it can't be nudity and it can't be drugs. Okay, well what about if they're gonna watch dogs? And all day long in their backyard, 10 to 12 dogs are gonna run and they're gonna, they're gonna defecate, they're gonna do this. Well, they said, well then you can call the health department. Here we go, neighbor to neighbor fighting. It's not pretty. And that's why I said, if we actually functioned the way we should function, if people would actually listen, you should have it based on the difference between urban, suburban, and rural. Because when my family members, because I'm not originally from St. Louis, all have their compounds, because they have tons of acres, nobody cares they have a shouse, and some of you may know what that is, a shouse. Nobody cares that they have their business and all their equipment there, because you can't see it, and you can't hear them. In the suburbs, they have very nice and well-maintained properties, but they're still far enough apart, and because they have the wealth probably to hire someone to go after the neighbor, and they may not have to see them, they have huge fences, they're not going to have to look at the people they're in court over this with. When you have to look at your neighbor every time you walk out of your house, that makes a problem. So I'm sorry I went too long on that one, but that's one that I will be fighting. Governor hasn't signed it yet. Okay? And had people listened, I've been fighting this for 6 years. I was famously known for the hot naked yoga comment one day. And that's why some things did get changed. Because I said, if my neighbor's doing that at 2 o'clock in the morning and they can have signage, they can have as many family members as they want at any time of the day. Sorry. So, 1662, and that's why I know we weren't going to agree on that one. And I went over, and I'm apologizing that I'm using numbers, but that's where my world was at that time. But there is one thing that was, that died that shouldn't have died. There was a really good education bill. And the education bill had in there, which you may or may not know what FAFSA is, but FAFSA is what college seniors fill out to the universities. We had 2 groups in the House that were killing these great education bills, because 681 almost didn't make it across before. Isn't that the one we're talking about? Which was, we're talking about good bills. There was very good bills. But they had insisted, so you had your group over here that said, government shouldn't have my information. And then you had the group over here that said, poor people can't fill them out. And then you had people in the middle going, okay, let's go back. FAFSA. That's been going on for at least 20 years. FAFSA is done by the counselors, usually at the schools. In our case, it was us. And I said, but I wouldn't have benefited from it. FAFSA is how the feds decide how many low-income students you have, so they know how much money to give to each university. And that university gives those low-income students money. So if you're saying my people are poor, right? They shouldn't have to do this, and they don't not gonna be able to do it. I'm like, no, the school is set up. These are public schools. They're set up to do this, and I promise you, they're going to want to do this because your students are not going to have money from the high end. And if you want to look from another point of view, because that's how I look at things, believe it or not, is that okay? So if we're going to make it so we're not going to have the FAFSA filled out, which we've been doing for over 20 years. 20 years we've been doing this. This is not new. Then fine. That means the state's going to have to find in the budget more money. Right? So we'll just have to, in the end, the state will end up having to pay more. But then the ones on the other side said government shouldn't have this information, that's private information. Well, then the government should know if I'm a Democrat or Republican, should they? Just think about that one. So that's why I tell people, I said, you've got to, you want to, and this will be one of the last things because I could talk forever. The one thing you want to know is that this is why I'm against term limits. And the reason I'm against term limits is because people like me have one last term left. And that's it, I'm out the door. I am unbelievably mentoring as many freshmen as I can and explaining to people, you have to do this because this is a temporary seat. This is not your seat. And if you have an ego, check it. I said because if you don't check it, someone's gonna check you soon. And learn how to play this game. And it's unfortunate, but it is a game. And so what I have said in the state of Missouri If I had my way, I'd have somebody pay me to undo the term limits. And what I would do is I'd say 16 years in either House or Senate. In other words, I'm not against them, period. I'm against the short term of them. And people always said, people are always hounding me to run for Senate. Well, everyone's trying to find a place to land, right? Because they're all getting kicked out. I said if there weren't term limits and it were 16 years, I would stay in the House. I'm happy in the House. You know what I'm saying? The cool kids are in the Senate. I like being a part of the kids, the kind of rough and tumble ones in the House, because I'm used to it. I like it. And I said my dream would have been to have been the first female Democrat Speaker of the House. That would have been my dream come true. So that's why I'm against the short term limits in the state of Missouri. Not because I'm against term limits. And if I ever, then I would also want to put term limits on the feds for 20 years. So anyway, I'm sorry I went too long. I'm known for it, so I apologize. I get excited. This stuff I love what I do. So if you ever hear me going, rah, 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 don't think it's because I don't like what I do. I love what I do. And I also had to make sure, and you all know more of the process, more of what's going on, because I know you're really smart at the Show Me Institute because I read your stuff. And I knew there might be some very specific questions. So I tried to do the best I could to do my homework last night, because I don't like to be unprepared. Because when I stand up on the floor of the House to speak, I'm not asking you questions because I don't know the answer. I'm asking you questions because I want it on record. It's coming out of your mouth, what you did.
I will say one thing, what she said about attaching amendments that haven't been filed as bills. That is how bad laws get passed.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't have that vetting process, it may be a great idea, but you never had that vetting process and the language. When I file bills, I don't know if I've ever passed a bill in its original language. Like, it always gets changed. And so that is, yeah, we don't want to do that.
No. And it's not new. So it's not new. It's just that because of term limits, the lobbyists have all the power in Jeff City because they know this game. They know the game. They know I know the game. That's why when I first got on fiscal review, that one lobbyist came to our meetings. That's not the case anymore. They are in that fiscal review meeting because they're worried about what is going to happen because this bill's got to get out. And I just sit there and go, for me, it was the best ever session. They needed me.
One other thing I didn't touch on was these special taxing districts, CIDs, TDDs. We have thousands of them in Missouri. And one thing that we did pass is it provides some accountability. So like, for instance, if they do a transportation district, once the project is completed, then they have to end the tax. And it also requires them to send those boundaries up to the Department of Revenue so that we have a good idea of where all these districts are.
Great. We have about 20 minutes left, so if anyone has any questions, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank both of you for serving. Being a local elected official myself, I appreciate how thankless of a job that is. But I'm the mayor of one of the St. Louis County many communities, municipalities, so I'm all about municipalities. I'm all concerned about what it is that Jeff City is doing to try to screw over the municipalities. And it seems they try to do it every single year.
Yep.
And I talked to our police chief, and one thing that bothers him, and I know it's not just limited to our chief, but a lot of police departments throughout St. Louis, I'm sure throughout the state of Missouri, is I think it's the Second Amendment Protection Act, SAPA. They're trying to change that. I think even the governor said it needed to be pulled back a little bit, and I thought there were some efforts in this last session, but I lost it. Whatever happened to that. And the second one is, if I can indulge everybody, there was also an effort to try and make the local officials local elections partisan at the school board level and mayor, aldermen, things like that, in the little municipalities like Brentwood. Any idea of what the status is on that one either?
So I don't think that had a lot of legs. It was some, we have thousands of bills that were filed, but it never had legs to make, local elections partisan. It was talked about, but it was never an amendment on the Senate floor or anything like that.
Okay.
It was in committee. The election
Right.
in the House, I don't know about the Senate, but they tried to do it in committee. And you should be happy to know that we formed the former local elected officials caucus in Jeff City. There are 20 of us sitting there. And we go over the bills that will hurt at the municipal level. And it's so cute. I have to tell you all this. Wes Rogers, who's a really good state rep out of the Kansas City side, he's not running again, but he's going to run for alderman in Kansas City. And so I turned to Wes and I said, Wes, I'm gonna see you up here because you're gonna be an alderman, you're going, what are they doing in Jeff City? And I said, you're gonna be up here going, don't do that to us, and that's what 1662 does. And we fought that, we're still fighting 1662.
But any word on that Second Amendment Act where it
was
$50,000 damages on
It
police?
it was talked about, but I'm not, like the Senate was, like she said, the Senate was very dysfunctional. And the reason for that is it was almost like there was 3 parties and no majority.
Yes.
So,
Well, I will tell you, that really needs to be addressed the next session, because, you know, our department's not working with the DEA anymore, they're not working with the FBI anymore, all out of fear of being on the receiving end of a $50,000 fine, which is ridiculous.
And that's not the only thing. So I stood up on the floor, and when we were passing that bill, the exact example I gave is the first example of why that was a bad thing. So I said to the sponsor, Jared Taylor, I said, Representative Jared Taylor, I said, okay, let me get this straight. I said, I have someone in my family who's DEA. I said, so I'm gonna go into a drug bust, all right? And so while there'll be tons of drugs there, because there's guns there, right? We're now null and void to arrest them for the drugs. And he goes, no, Representative Baringer, that'll never happen. I go, well, let me think about this. If I'm a criminal, I'm going to find ways to make my life easier, not harder. So if you pass this, I said, we're gonna have so many arrests that they're gonna hire good lawyers. And I said, and they're gonna get out of selling drugs. And he just looked at me and said, that's never gonna happen. That was the first one that happened. I can't remember, it was in a small rural area in Missouri. And they did exactly that. The actual drug dealers have good lawyers, right? And they got them out of their drug dealing charges because there were guns there. Ha, go figure. So that is my frustration. When I try to say, I'm not doing this because I'm trying to be a pain as usual. I'm doing it because I'm saying, I were to think like criminal things. How would I use this to my advantage? And that's exactly what they did. And then I stood and said, and it's an unfunded mandate at the municipal level because of all of the lawsuits.
Right.
It's an unfunded mandate.
Thank you for coming, Senator, Representative. You said you didn't matter in the previous league. You've always mattered to me, and you know that. You know that. So it's great to see both of you here. So, Senator, I would like your comments on both of this. So we were following your tax bill that had Cids and TDD reform. Was it 961, a bill that didn't quite make it over the hump? But what was the one then that got some of that stuff in there? And to more exactly, was it able to reform the part that small community improvement districts don't have to publish their financial data because they're considered personal taxes and it has to be redacted on reports if it's a small enough SID? Was that reformed? Did that make it over the hump?
yeah, so the entire package that was in the bill that I filed, I think it was, it's been a week now, I forget all the numbers.
I know.
It was 9:30 or 9:31. That entire package was passed, and there was also some other tax credit reforms. We actually had a tax that was passed in 2400, where if you get we have a tax credit in Missouri where if you are a business, a non-Missouri business, you actually could qualify for this tax credit, even if you didn't have any employees in Missouri. And it actually, I had a package that, and also put stiffer penalties in if you didn't comply with some of our accounting, and it actually saved the state about $6 million.
Well, I would just.
But that last little piece, I'm not sure about.
Yeah.
That last little piece that you talked about.
And I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah.
Well, that's obviously the Children's Institute. We need. So, I hope in future years we get to the point where we actually start putting real limits on the number of SIDs and TIFs and TDDs
So
throughout our state, including in Brentwood.
Yeah, we had. I think we. Yeah, I think we made some progress. We had the TIF commissions were put in place back in 2016, and then we had last year we passed the prohibition of doing TIFs in floodplains. Of course, that's more towards TIFs. And then I passed a fantastic bill that was vetoed that would require a vote of every single one of these districts in the entire city or county that they reside in. And that would have created some great accountability, but unfortunately it got vetoed.
Well, that is what we need to have back and try to convince the sitting governor or future governor to sign that.
So when I was a local elected official and I was involved in the Missouri Municipal League, I made a big to-do about the fact that you're robbing Peter to pay Paul when each municipality is using these to, go up against each other to get that Walmart, to get that Costco, right? So I made that a big deal, and I said that the problem is that we're not going back to what the most original part of that, which is but for, which means that no one would build here but for this, right? So if we had clamped down on that, we wouldn't have as many as we have. And I will agree with you, to this day, if anybody wants to go, look at the Central West End. I mean, the Cortex, that was a huge example of doing those, and they work. They brought this area back, but they never should have torn up Eagle Road and that entire neighborhood back there and done those. That one I will, to this day, hold as the shining example of it being used incorrectly.
Yeah, there's no question that the majority of TIFs are done in wealthier areas, which is actually against what their original intent was. We did change the definition of blight last year in that same bill. Didn't go far enough, but we did remove the word morals because that has no really functional definition when you're defining something. And then also obsolete platting, we deleted that from our blight definition because anything is obsolete depending on what its purpose is.
Thank you, both of you.
And then just to give you an example, so I know I have the minutes on the floor. We actually do minutes, and I read them. I read everything. And the reason I do that is because I need people to see that, Bill comes to the floor and, we have House Amendment 1, House Amendment 2, House Amendment 3, House Amendment 4, House Amendment 5, House Amendment 6. And then it's third read and passed, and it's got to go through fiscal review because those amendments change the fiscal note. And then I have to go through every single one of these amendments and see what they do and find out how it is good, bad, or indifferent. And while I normally, we didn't even get to the budget. And while I say to myself, in the old days, because we were drunk sailors spending money this year, in the old days it was always about, do we have the funds? Do they exist? Well, that was the opposite this year. Because the budget, the ARPA funds, we were swimming in money, right? Just swimming in money. And what upset me is that on our side, our budget chair, who I'd gone to, and I had two very needed projects in the 82nd district that are not being taken care of at all. And he said, I'm not going to earmark anything. But the House sent that bill over to the Senate with $2.8 billion not marked. And the Senate went over there and goes, you get $1 million, you get $5 million, you get $10 million, you get $20 million, you get $30 million. And they spent it down, and it's all earmarked. So if you were lucky enough to have a senator who had the pull, the power, or needed what they needed, you got some serious cash flow coming in. And that will hurt the city of St. Louis because they're expanding. They got really good money for the Kansas City airport, so I'm very proud that they did it, right? However, Kansas City and St. Louis used to be neck and neck when it comes to how we're growing. That horse has now passed us. So Kansas City, especially with this money they're gonna get from ARPA to expand their airport. So I'm not mad that they got it, so understand. But from the city of St. Louis standpoint, because I went on the trade mission with the governor to the UK and Ireland, and they said, we need a direct, the UK said, we will not do business with the state of Missouri until there's a direct flight from Missouri to Heathrow. So what do you think Greg Razor's doing? Senator Greg Razor's doing? He's working on a direct flight at the Kansas City airport from Heathrow to Kansas City. And St. Louis better be paying attention because that is going to be where they just take off and we're in the dust. Sorry. But yeah, they had fun spending that money.
Yeah, they spent way too much for mine. I would spend a lot less.
Yeah, and if I were to, and I know that sounds terrible, but I tell people, I said, anytime you have, because I've always worked in nonprofit when I wasn't, an elected official, and the one thing you gotta be careful of is that when you give people money and there are timelines to spend it down, right? They will try and find things to spend it on if they can't, right? So what we need to pay attention to in the next couple of years is the auditing of all these funds. Because I want to make sure that if we gave you that 10 million, that 10 million went to where you said it was going. And so that's why I just love to look at those numbers because I'm just like, that doesn't look right to me. Like I said, I always look for what's not there, because if it's there, that means you wanted everybody to see it. If it's not there, it's because you didn't want us to see it.
So following on from that, why didn't the city of St. Louis senators put money in for the St. Louis airport to get flights to Heathrow. In other words, you
Oh, they
just give that great
definitely
example.
had their projects they put money in.
Yeah. I think they got the majority. Didn't they get a huge?
Yeah,
Yeah. They actually, I heard it was crazy.
Yeah, they got
A
senators
lot
from
of
St.
money.
Louis got a lot of stuff.
Well, no, I understand that, but that's a great example of where you would have thought the city of St. Louis also would have said, hey, we want money for this, so.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I think with the airport, I think if we would have privatized it with, companies that do this for business, I think we would be much more likely to get direct flights.
All right, and I'm gonna disagree, because I was an alderman and I served on transportation, and we are very heavily federally grant, so, for that reasons alone, the loss in the federal money, they'd never make money. So I don't believe in the privatization, but I believe in the regionalism. I don't think it should be the city's airport, I don't think it should be the county's airport, I think it should be a regional airport. And if it was regional, then we would actually qualify for more help, and we could actually expand it. A lot of people don't know, and just so you know, I read the comptroller's audit of the city. I told you I'm crazy. And the key that people don't realize is that the city only makes maybe $4 million a year off the airport, right? The money is made by the county. They own all the parking. You have to understand, we only own the airport. We don't own parking. So the county makes tons of money off that airport. And that's why I'd like to see it be regional. And I don't want it to be a St. Louis City airport, I don't want it to be a St. Louis County, I want it to be a regional airport. And I believe in that, not privatization. Because once you take out all the federal subsidies for that airport, you're gonna lose money. It will not run successfully, because you can never, you listen to the Assuming Institute. The economy can always be guaranteed what's gonna happen. We're getting ready to go into a recession. So the cost of fuel may go to a point where we're gonna have to give some help to the airlines. And that usually comes in, we give them, the last time we went through a recession, we had to give the airport a deduction in the gate fees because of the cost of fuel to them. They were losing money, and they're gonna start cutting the different connections into the St. Louis. So in order to keep that from happening, we as a city didn't cut the gate fees temporarily. So that's why it's not what people think. You don't make good money off airports. You just don't. And I wouldn't go into a business I couldn't make money off.
We have time for one more question. No pressure, make it a good one.
So, this session seemed especially dysfunctional, but there have been a lot of sessions where it seems like all the action happens in the last week and everything just passes at the very end. Does the session need to be as long as it is? If it were shorter, would the same stuff happen and we get the same number of bills passed on a shorter timeline and streamline the process?
Yeah, so what happens is there's a constant fight between the House and Senate.
Sure.
And so what happens is the Senate is working on Senate bills, and they're like, well, we don't want to work on House bills until our Senate bills are dead. Like, there's not enough time to get them through. And the House is like, well, we don't want to work on Senate bills until our House bills are dead. And there's no point in working on House bills. So yeah, I mean, there is a point to saying that, if you made the session longer, you wouldn't necessarily pass more bills. That being said, if you made it too short, then you don't have that vetting process in committee as much. And so you do want to make sure there's time for that. So, I mean, I'm happy with how the length of session is currently. I don't think if you made it longer, it would necessarily benefit Missouri necessarily. But I know some states have like 60-day sessions. I do think that might be a little bit short for the vetting process.
So, you may or may not know, the Missouri State Legislature only met every other year before 1967. My mother started working in 1966 at the Capitol. I'm originally from Jefferson City. And so then it went to every year. What would be the best way to do this is if we did the budget every other year and we only did other legislation the other year. That would be actually the most functional way to do it, because I think, like I said, with the way the budget was passed this year, I mean, I don't know how, they did the best they could, right? But with the amount of money that was flowing in, with the amount of what was happening, we could have easily spent just the entire session on the budget.
Yeah, there's no question that that is true. I mean, the budget I felt like didn't really get the time it deserved this year.
It just, and they couldn't, because the Senate wouldn't take up bills.
Although, we didn't get the budget, I'll say we didn't get the budget until very, very late. The Senate did not. So the Senate really didn't have time to work on the budget because the House was so late in getting the budget over to the Senate.
Which, because of what was going on, it took them longer. But on that same note, though, we passed 44 bills, minus the appropriations bills. We've only gone lower than that one other time in our history. But if you think about it, I tell people the last 2 weeks of session are the most dangerous 2 weeks of Missouri residents' life. And I said, so the fact that we only passed 4 bills may be a good thing. Okay? All right, that may be a good thing. So it's not always better. More isn't always better in this instance. And I think the reason more passed is because they were clean bills. They were one subject, they were one thing. We are doing omnibus bills like that.
There was a lot of, like, the education bill. I mean, there was a lot of good stuff, a lot of agreement of stuff that was on it, but it was a big bill.
Right.
2,400 monster bill. I mean, we did have some big omnibus bills this year.
Yeah, I think the education bill it could have been. Was the fiscal note that I got 10 to 20 minutes to look at, it was 63 pages.
Jeez.
63 pages of fiscal note, not the bill, the fiscal note.
So like I had 8 bills that I passed, or 8 bills I filed, ended up passing on 44 bills. So that's just give you an example. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So at the end, everyone's trying to, find a vessel to attach their, bills to. And so I just tell people, I said, you better make sure your vessel has a tinder. I said, because that vessel's sinking and you better go get on that one. So that's why I tell people, because everyone's like, oh, my bill, they'll be all happy it passed, let's say that in March, but it hasn't been truly agreed and finally passed until it's TFAP. It's not in, I'm sorry. I said, I'll never get excited ever. I said, because I had my bills on multiple bills and they were sinking, and they were all sinking due to infighting on not my side of the aisle. They were making them sink because so-and-so wanted this, so-and-so wanted that, and it was like, oh my goodness. So, and I look forward to next session. We're gonna have a new speaker, Dean Plocker, and I have a great relationship with the new speaker, and the reason that's important to me is because he also knows my in-depth knowledge of local elections and what happens to the municipals. And so he will actually listen to me when I say, this is really not good for the municipality. So, and then I'll be calling Wes Rogers, what, you gonna come out and visit us?